Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 10. We did it, we reached the double digits. I'm so proud of you guys. We finally got here. And this is a very peaceful and thorough section that's all focused on art. As you saw from the intro, it's just art. There's no art from Amnesia, art from SOMA, and art in conclusion. It's just art. Because as much as there is stuff to say, it's a subject that's gotten a little bit gutted out of it because of the different things I've talked about in different sections, you know? But, you know, it's probably going to end up being the quickest segment, but it's still undeniably important. The art in these games are linchpins in the plan to create the environment in which to scare the shit out of people. Maintaining the environmental art is important to immersion and setting tone, as well as dictating to the player where the hell you even are. Art in games has historically been very polarized, like, games, oftentimes, will be celebrated for their incredible art, or their new style, or you end up with something that people tend to ignore for its art. Basically, how the world is detailed can sometimes be very important, or just not at all. In fairness though, the lack of detail can often be a stylistic choice. In Amnesia we have an art set that is mostly grungy and dark, to reflect the dirty and decrepit Prussian castle in the story that has to this point been abandoned to the creatures that now populate it. There are several pieces of inspiration that are made clear in the dev commentaries, such as the Basilica Cistern in Istanbul being the primary inspiration for the Cistern section in the game. Agrippa as a set piece was inspired by the movie Seven, specifically the sloth scene. The Kayak as an enemy was heavily inspired by not only the look of the graboids, as they're referred to in the movie Tremors, but also the element of them being essentially invisible until the last moment. Finally, we got this crazy thing in front of the inner sanctum being directly inspired from Event Horizon. This shit's pretty neat, right? This shows a level of passion that I really enjoy about design in general. You throw yourself into your work, right? Like, I regularly talk game design on my streams and with my friends. We often watch some great videos on YouTube together about subjects we enjoy, and we also rip into people with terrible ideas. My point is that Thomas and the rest of the team at Frictional had a lot of themselves in this project. What made them them was, of course, their influences, and it's not like the design is something incredible in Amnesia, but this sort of thing is important. Did you know that the inspiration for Amnesia came from the Stanford prison experiments? That creepy experiment to see what would happen when power is provided to certain people and taken away from others. I'd recommend checking it out. It essentially works as the inspiration for Daniel's downfall in the prison area of Brennenburg. How he was so willingly able to fall so far in terms of his own morals. There are quite a few things in this game that are based on true events, you know.
The flashback of the guy trapped is actually inspired by true events. During the bubonic plague outbreaks, people were buried so quickly that it was not always checked that they were probably dead. This meant that people sometimes woke up, finding themselves locked up, entombed, surrounded by corpses. Scratches on doors and walls of such rooms have been found, confirming that it did happen.
There are many choices that Frictional made in terms of artistic style. They have two segments that briefly give the player a sense of going outside, that contained a bunch of assets that have been gutted for custom stories to take players outside too. But listen to the purpose.
One thing which worried me was that the player would feel trapped within the castle in an artificial way, that is, that they would perhaps realize that they are running around these boxed up levels. A good way to disarm this feeling is by adding exterior levels, so I asked Thomas, could we show the outside somehow? He already had some ideas, but he figured they would have to be cut eventually because of the costs. So I was really happy to see this making it into the game. It just gives you that little reminder of that there is a world out there, which is not only made from references.
Now that's pretty neat, right? There are a whole bunch of changes and restrictions they gave themselves during design to maintain different principles, like the lack of over-the-top violence. The point of this was that it isn't needed to make some real fear. It's that whole blowing your load thing that I was talking about, you know? The thing that Outlast does, like, totally...
As with the Cistern, this takes the player closer to Daniel's dark past. It was important here that the corpses did not have the normal gory shock value, but was more true to reality and disturbing. We really wanted to approach this stuff with respect and not just show it in an exploitative fashion. I hope that shows when you play the game.
Moving on, we have a whole bunch of visual aids that Frictional use for their games. To help amp the atmosphere and the tone, the engine they use, HLP, has come a long way since its inception, the focus is being on physics, lighting, and particle effects. Honestly, the lighting being so soft and mood setting in HLP 2 is why Amnesia works so well. I mean, other than the other million reasons I've mentioned. I've been using shots from the games to separate each segment up for these videos, and a lot of games wouldn't be able to provide that for me, but the mood lighting in Amnesia and SOMA is phenomenal. The torches and candle lights are all very soft, once again splashing on the surrounding environment. This combined with assets and physics that match the era and environment makes for a very engrossing and enriching experience. They even pull in some old assets because it matched the area so well. So how about the soundtrack? Well, like I said back in my previous video, I think the sound design and the soundtrack itself are both bloody wonderful, and match this game to a T. Miko did a fantastic job with the tools he had.
If you listen to the music tracks more carefully, you may find that characters have their own musical themes, which can usually be heard when you read papers during the game. These themes appear in many variations, so it's not always so easy to recognize them immediately. And in the end of the game, some of these themes will go quite insane.
They had a lot of character-specific things going on in Amnesia. Did you guys know that if you lose a significant portion of sanity, then the portrait of Alexander changes?
Ah! Oh, skulls. Ooh. Oh! Whoa! What the fuck is that? What is that? Oh my god! Oh!
The Guardian monster has its own musical theme, which you can hear in many situations in the game, even if the Guardian is not physically present. Actually, it's more like a noise sound than a certain melody, and I played it with my bassoon. The theme has many forms, and this one is almost a direct sound coming from the instrument. And this noise, which sounds like screaming, is a highly modified version of it.
Seriously, that instrument he's using, it fucking freaks me out. The whole fucking sequence freaks me out. For fuck's sake, fuck off, you creepy ass piece of shit water monster. Oh my god, there is an infinite amount of respect to have for Frictional on this subject, and all the sounds are ripped from life itself.
Hi, I am Tapio, and I made monster sounds and vision sounds for this game. Yeah, I just love this monster. I think it was pretty fun to make because there was underwater sounds as well as sounds from the above. I think I wanted it to sound like a very big monster, but still very fast. And I thought that voice itself needed to be high-pitched screaming because water is splashing around and messing other sounds. Actually, a great example is the attack sound where there is big water splash as it jumps from the water. At the same time, you can hear a short scream sound which is made from the cat sounds. I think it works great. I think other great sound is when it's just eating in the level. You can hear it eating meat and hear the bones crashing under the water. I made the eating sounds by walking in the water and breaking dry wooden sticks. The sound itself didn't need much processing or editing because it sounded almost like you hear now. Well, this is Water Monster, so I recorded lots of water sounds. For example, bubble sounds are made with a watering can, which is sunken in the water. And when it's chasing the player, its movement is made by a big rock, which I just threw in the lake. It feels like it's running after you or hitting its big hands on the water. I think there is lots of power in this monster.
Actually, upon my snooping of Amnesia sound files, I found something rather interesting, and that was the theme for Herbert. It sounds like this. There is an unused sound in SOMA, a sound for Simon's cell phone. A ringtone, if you will. The phone in the game only vibrates, so I guess they had to remove it. How about we listen to what that ringtone was? I love stuff like this. The sound design, man, it's better than I can give it credit. This shit stays with you as you play. It was something they really figured out as key when designing this game.
One thing I do like about this game more than anything, I mean, the atmosphere is great and all, and I'm having a blast. The sound, the audio, like, really sells it. I just wanted to say that.
Ultimately, though, you gotta pace yourself with this information, as Miko does warn.
There are a few music clips which include some choirs singing words, and I must tell you that these words doesn't mean anything in any language, or at least I didn't intend them to mean anything. I used a sample library which has its own word building function, so you can have a choir sing words. And I just invented words which sounded cool. So don't bother to think what they are singing, that's a waste of time.
Regardless, the various forms of art in Amnesia and SOMA will be touched on in more depth later. But for now, I would like to simply say that Amnesia is important because it shows you that you can really put every aspect of a game to use when creating one very important experience, and that was fear. Permeated from the moment you boot the main menu. Anyway, in SOMA the art is similar in that respect, but not entirely. The growth of the HLP engine to 3 led to the refinement of lighting, physics manipulation, and of course the particle effects. There were several tests run to make sure the content was fully ready, yet that didn't stop a myriad of issues from rising. Frictional are aware of this, but as the old programming tale goes, you fix one bug and 2 more rise. So ultimately, there were many important things to consider about the artwork and its gelling with the environment in SOMA, like for example the use of basically everything the engine has to offer to create an environment prepared for spooks is natural to them at this point. But that doesn't mean they don't take the smaller things into consideration.
Your teddy bear could use some repairs.
Toby always breaks. He's top-heavy, so he keeps falling over.
Perhaps this is a metaphor for Simon's brain in the game being filled with thought on whether or not he is truly Simon, or just an inferior copy, and these very thoughts leading to his own demise. That he is indeed top-heavy, causing him to fall. Or it's just a cute teddy bear mixed with some wiring to represent the horrible creatures in the game. Seriously though, the world is so ready to put you right into the mindset of, oh fuck, I am not safe.
It definitely, one of the things about Frictional Games, and especially the original Amnesia The Dark Descent, was setting up a setting, like...
But how did it come to take place under the sea anyway?
I love it because the ocean is terrifying.
Yeah.
The ocean is absolutely terrifying, man.
That was one of the reasons that that Thomas and Jens went for the idea of the ocean in the first place. It's just that weight crushing down on you, and you've got no idea what's out there. We have no idea what's there.
Yeah.
And it was basically Thomas and I. We met in Thomas is the second co-founder of Frictional Games, and we met in the park in Helsingborg. And I said, Thomas, I've been thinking, should we make a game that's underwater? And he was, oh yes, my God, I've been thinking the same thing. We should make a game underwater because no one has made a game underwater.
I love that basically they said, hey, the sea is spooky. Alright then, let's go. And SOMA was born. Obviously it's not as simple as the sea is scary at this point though. A few more layers have been added since then, and of course the land in which the world spreads over is pretty fucking big too. That decision from an artistic point works brilliantly, but from a gameplay standpoint has resulted in getting lost a hell of a lot. Thomas Grip thought that being lost in deep sea would be a terrifying prospect, and I think that's true to real life, but not so much in a game, because... and this is something that Frictional have definitely covered in terms of design, getting lost will eventually result in frustration, as I've said before. When we think back to getting lost in the choir hall back in Amnesia, there were plenty of ways to escape it, for example hugging a wall or following the pipes, or really just, if you walk one direction, you're eventually going to find something. This was not the same thing in SOMA. The good old strategy of hugging a wall can often end up killing you in SOMA, and when you start to pile on the deaths, the sense of being lost starts to fall apart. Anyway, SOMA took a while to make.
Well, I mean, we've been working on this thing for 5 years now.
And that time was spent making this place seem pretty fucking accurate.
This is a thermal plant. This is a we've tried to base each environment on a research station that would exist at the bottom of the sea. What we've got here is a power station for the rest of the plant, which is plumbed into some of the deep sea thermal vents, so it's taking energy off that. I won't say we're absolutely true to science all the way through, but we're trying to be true to science fiction.
When you walk through SOMA and pay attention to it, it all meshes. Every last detail feels designed and constructed to the point where this could totally be a believable futuristic underwater station. Literally everything, from the suits to the transport to the monitors to the sites themselves, all feel very realistic. When considering they're accompanied by a soundtrack and theme that dwarfs the library that Amnesia had in amount, and in my opinion, quality too. When it comes to getting engrossed in what's on screen, SOMA nails it.
We have the kind of intense moments that you got from Amnesia. This is rooted in I won't say a more realistic world, but fundamentally a more sort of science fiction-y world, in that in Amnesia you're obviously in a haunted house, so you can kind of hand wave a few things as to why did that door close just then, you know, it's spookiness. But everything we've done, we've tried to root in SOMA in something that actually happens, in something that really exists, and it's honestly not midichlorians, yeah?
Of course, I'm not some kind of expert in underwater research facilities, but I think you understand what I mean when I say it looks and sounds the way you would expect it to look and sound. It's honestly not something anyone criticizes anyway. But it's also not appreciated enough, in my opinion. So much fucking work goes into this, and Frictional only end up hearing about how
they failed.
Ugh, I know this is a point I've raised several times. It's just something that's really good to echo. Thomas Grip knew about this. He spends plenty of his interviews and his blog posts talking about this reaction from fans, trying to figure out what went wrong, when honestly, I'm sitting here with all this information, coming to the conclusion that he made something that just, it flew over people's heads, as Markiplier said. And it's really hard for someone to spend so much time on a project like that and have that be the conclusion. It's just not good enough, you know? And it really just makes me feel really bad for the guy. That's all. Obviously for the whole of Frictional. But, you know, I probably will get into more of that as we reach the conclusion of this whole project, because honestly there's a lot I have to say about the development of the games, like what they meant to the industries, and just fucking reviewers, man. Anyway, I think from an artistic standpoint, Frictional could have taken a bit more advantage of the humanity sides of the things in the games, like I mentioned a few parts before. Could you imagine having someone reacting in the game with as much emotion as they showed in transmission? The moments where people meet their friends but are stuck in machines worked so much better in that show than it did with Carl Semkin in the beginning of the game.
Hey, hold on! I know you, you're Golaski, the handyjack gasket case. Hey man, it's me, Alvarin. We were at Omicron together before you went to Theta and got caught up in all that robot weirdness.
Harry?
Yeah, exactly! My god, it feels like years, man. There's something wrong, isn't there? You would tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you, Gas?
Not to say that Carl isn't great, it's just that SOMA was missing something artistically in the humanity side of things, despite being a game that questioned everything about humanity, and obviously it was still successful in that from my perspective. So I think I just wanted more gut-punching for other characters, instead of laying every shock onto Simon, or by extension Catherine as well. Maybe just have some set pieces that really showed the plight of humanity, and of course, as we said before, something to sort of imply how Pathos 2 was run. Amnesia has many memories of people commenting on the hardship of living in the castle, and even notes pertaining to jobs that needed to be done. Not to say Amnesia is better in this regard, just that it had some other ways of doing similar things. Regardless of that, SOMA felt truly lived in and worked in. It felt like it was a home to a lot of people, and the artistic choices reflected that. The sound design was ultimately a boon in this department, and we'll touch on that a little later too. When we look at world design ultimately and what it was meant for, it's fucking nailed. Nailed. There's an argument to be made about things they could potentially improve, but honestly, it is nailed.
The environmental design is stunning. Pathos 2 feels like a lived and worked in place, but Frictional didn't only pay attention to the interiors to make sure they were spooky. The bottom of the ocean can be a frightening and beautiful place as well. In the end, I feel this is Frictional's most massaged product. It seems like they were retrospective about their previous successes and built on what made them great.
Now, in conclusion, there are a few more things you can say on this. Amnesia was fully immersive, at least to many people, certainly to me. I remember playing it a long time ago and losing my shit while the world around me really became my world. My screen was falling away, and you really do have to back up and take a break sometimes. But Amnesia also lacked detail. When you look at Prussian castles, they're a lot more fantastical, and they have much more in terms of items and objects and colors decorating the rooms. I know that the Dark Descent is meant to be dark and dank and Descent-y, but it lacks detail. Not entirely, mind you. It still kind of does lack it, though. Oh, by the way, there is this cool thing where you stack up about 1 million boxes, or just every available box in the area. Believe me, I did this. Then you can reach out of the map in the opening of the game and spot this neat little secret message from the dev team if you get up there. To top it off, you can just kill yourself moments after jumping out of the map. Hello. SOMA has some serious attention to making all of its puzzles aesthetically match the environment, while by comparison, Amnesia had an idea for a puzzle and threw it in the game with some attention to making it match. Whoever heard of number puzzles work out like this in real life, or the rods having shapes engraved on the top of them? I understand it's to help people complete them, but seriously.
This was inspired by games like 30 Flights of Loving and Windowsill that you can see pictured here. And the idea is that the player walks into a room and there's all of these places where they can interact. So that they can go here and do some interaction, go there and do some interactions. And then there's a very clear exit that where they can exit the scene and go on to the next one. And the idea was that without having any blockers, the player wouldn't be super focused on solving the puzzles. There would be more role playing and so forth. But it didn't really work because the player, they got, oh, what I'm supposed to be doing, what is happening here, and so forth. So they got confused and annoyed, and we lost a lot of the engagement. So had to rethink, and we said, okay, let's add puzzles again, but not puzzles for puzzle's sake, but puzzles that make the player go through certain things in the narrative. So you set up a scene in a puzzle-like manner that which outcome is that the player does some interesting storytelling stuff. Did that instead, and now we got the frustration from the previous system was gone, and we got a lot of engagement. So lesson from that is that without goals and structure, no engagement, which is pretty obvious if you're making like a normal game, but making a game with that explores themes, it's not that obvious because you might not consider stuff like this, but it's very, very important that you have that from the get-go.
The direction in art is pooling the exact same way as the gameplay and the atmosphere and just about everything else in these games. They have a goal to see through, and just as you would expect, the machine with hundreds of moving parts all focused on one job really does pull it off. Which one has the superior art though? Which one's art helped it tell its story and describe its gameplay? Well, it has to be SOMA. As much as Amnesia's worked fine, great in fact, it's something that has gone relatively unappreciated in SOMA, despite being one of its strongest traits. Like, I'm not exaggerating here, SOMA's world design, it's pretty incredible. Like, this ties into the environmental storytelling as well. Everything is detailed, everything is constructed, it's designed, it's all got a purpose. While Amnesia feels a little bit more like repeated assets. Like, you'll find the same flower pot, or you'll find the same books. They're all repeated, and it's not like, you know, there's not enough assets to make that an immersive experience. It is immersive. It's just not something that you can appreciate as much as what they did with SOMA. I really feel like that was almost a breather in terms of a section, because we didn't even have to listen to a half-hearted analysis of the game being shouted out on my screen by any of the self-professed reviewers of YouTube. Well, none that were too cringe, anyway. I'm afraid the following section will not have the same benefit. Though, in case anybody didn't notice, I am gonna say that in terms of art, SOMA does sort of take the win in this section. And it's not like I have a tally or anything, it's just to make sure you guys are following me when I go through this. And I know that this is going to end up being the shortest part in my whole series, but like I said, it's almost like, maybe not a midway point or anything, but an intermission of sorts. So I really appreciate all the people who've watched up to this point. It has been hefty, it has been crazy. Thank you so much, and well, I hope to see you at the end. Goodbye.
And what we're trying to do is kind of do the next thing. I mean, Amnesia was 5 years ago, and as you know, it kind of changed things, really. But there's a lot of other things out there on the market. We're wanting to do something a bit different with this title. It's still horror. It's obviously still horror. We're not throwing out anything that we've done, but we're trying to kind of change things so that You've got the scariness, the environments from Amnesia. You've got the creatures, the running, the hiding. All of that is there. But we're really trying to add a new level of horror, and that new level of horror is asking a bunch of really disturbing questions about humanity, about your place in the world. And what we want to do is, when you put the controller down, make it so that when you walk away, you still have these really weird questions in your head. Yeah. So we just want to cause you to think.